Okay, if everybody could come in, that would be great, and sit down and be quiet and make sure your devices have all been silenced, because we have another wonderful set of treats here. I think, honestly, if I'd been organizing a conference, I would have had it be a 3-day conference with all this richness of people and participants and interactions and information. But anyway, we are so blessed to have so many wonderful people here in town together. Thank you for all quietening down so we can hear the next great panel. I'm Helena Cobban. I'm the CEO of a company called Just World Books that was founded by myself with the goal of expanding the discourse in this country on issues of vital global concern. And as it happens, most of our books recently have been about Palestine, including this fabulous title by Nora Barrows Friedman, which speaks directly to the experiences that you're going to hear in person from Ahmed Amani and Dima right now. This book and many other fine books are available for sale at the WRMEA book stand, which also has olive oil and Palestinian tchotchkes and all kinds of wonderful things. So I urge you to support them by going and buying all those great products. That's the commercial interlude from me. We're going to start with Amani El-Khattatbi, who is the founding editor-in-chief of MuslimGirl.net, a blog aimed at eliminating stereotypes surrounding Islam and promoting the place of Muslim women in Western society. Amani, by the way, in case you didn't know, this whole panel is about what's happening on the college campuses these days, which is absolutely crucial to the future of this issue. So that's why it's particularly great to have this youthful energy here. And it comes with an enormous amount of experience of organizing on campuses. So Amani ran into trouble with Rutgers University trustees and its daily newspaper, the Daily Targum, which decided that criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. In June 2012, the ADC named Khattatbi its media relations specialist. So we're delighted to hear first and foremost from Amani El-Khattatbi.
Good morning / almost afternoon, everyone. I'm really honored to be opening up this panel. It is definitely crucial to the conversation surrounding how we're going to be talking about Israel and Palestine and how we're going to shape politics in the future. So I'm excited to have this panel here, and I thank the organizers for allowing us this opportunity to speak on these topics with such a distinguished audience and amongst such amazing speakers that all of us have been referencing all throughout college for the work that we've done. So I want to start out by posing a question to the room. I want to hear your thoughts, your opinions. I want to bring up this column. That just went away completely. Someone can help me with this, please? Thank you. Okay. Until it comes back up on the screen behind me, I want to read aloud what it says. It's a column that was published in the Daily Targum, Rutgers University's student newspaper. And it was written in criticism of a new building that Hillel was raising funds for on our campus. They had a huge building in the center of our university, and they were raising funds to make an even bigger one to be able to provide even more services to the campus community. This article was published around that time. It's called, "Can Hillel's Funding Be Put to Better Use Elsewhere?" In the column, Colleen Jolly, the writer, says, "If you know anything about Israel, you can conclude that pro-Israel parties are good at getting money into funds, i.e., the purchases of Jewish National Fund and modern-day Palestine. On December 2nd, the Jewish Federation of Greater Middlesex County, where Rutgers University is situated, a federally and privately funded agency, raised $400,000 at a telefund held at the Douglas Campus Center. I'm not 100% sure where this money is going, but seeing that they use the university building, my only guess would be that the university, or specifically to the proposed Hillel building. This building is to be named after Eva and Ari Helbom. So Colleen brought up an interesting point, right? Her column didn't take into account how that money was being accrued or the fact that Hillel's building was being privately funded, but it brought up some links that she saw with pro-Israel organizations and parties across the country, or what she viewed as her own experiences with them. Now, does this column have anti-Semitic undertones? Do you think so? Okay. I want to keep that in mind as we look at this next column. Now, Colleen Jolly was a student. This column was published by the same newspaper, Rutgers Daily Paper, by a man who actually has a position, an official position as a rabbi at Hillel on campus. And this was published a few years prior. It was during the uproar around Operation Cast Lead. So Rabbi Weiss says, if you know anything about, he says, standing on the steps of Broward Commons on College Avenue campus, they held a vigil for, referring to an organization that later became known as SJP on campus, the 1,400 lives lost during the war in Gaza more than 2 years ago, the Daily Targum reported, yet students and staff who came for the ambiance of a peaceful vigil that night may not have known that they were involved in a vigil which mourned the deaths of terrorists. Included in the number of victims being mourned were a whopping 600 to 700 Hamas terrorist operatives that were also killed in the Gaza war. Student groups paying homage to known terrorists fuels fear, hatred, resentment, and divides our campus community. This kind of activity is much more common on more hostile and radically charged campuses. University students were exposed to paying tribute to fallen terrorists under the guise of innocent civilians. Now, does this column seem racist? Right? I mean, I'm not gonna bring up anti-Semitism and how it also applies to Arabs and how this could be applicable as anti-Semitism, but it's interesting that this column received an entire uproar. I actually published this column. I was the opinions editor of the student newspaper at the time. And this came to my desk, and I decided to run with it. We edited it. It was much more offensive before we decided to publish it. But I and several other editors went through the editing process with it, went forward with it, because I felt like there were much worse things published in this newspaper before for other groups, right? And if we're going to be boasting about freedom of speech in our college newspaper, it should apply to all types of columns that we receive, and it shouldn't be filtered based on who we're talking about. But this op-ed turned out to be the one that launched 1,000 other op-eds, and this was the result. This was a public statement issued by the editor-in-chief, who was my boss at the time, and this decision was made completely without my consideration at all, even though I was the editor of that page. And in it, he says, basically that they had decided to take down the article, and looking back, elements in that piece really discriminatory undertones that do not reflect the values and goals of our organization. These elements, which I personally find distasteful and irrelevant, greatly overshadow any sort of argument the author was trying to make. So what happened was, as a result of that op-ed by Colleen Jolly about Hillel's building, a series of actions were taken by the newspaper that were not taken when it came to the way that the newspaper published articles about other entities, other parties in this conversation on Israel and Palestine. They removed Colleen Jolly's column from the website completely, which is almost unheard of. They even issued a retraction in the corrections of the printed newspaper the following week. They released a public statement, which takes a lot to get from our editorial staff at the Targum. And on top of that, something that happened behind the scenes that didn't receive much visibility at all, by the pressure of Hillel around this column, they were able to get the Board of Trustees to implement sensitivity training to every incoming editor on how to identify anti-Semitic undertones in columns that they're editing. And then, on top of that, in case you thought that wasn't enough, they also decided, the Board of Trustees told the editorial staff that from that year forth, any column or letter to the editor, anything that was submitted to them that was on Israel or Palestine had to go straight to the Board of Trustees for their approval. Now, number one, I'm pretty sure that's literally the definition of censorship, if you want to open it up in a dictionary. But number two, if we're talking about anti-Semitism, and that was the charge, what in the world does that have to do with the Israel-Palestine conflict? This really powerful, influential organization on campus, Hillel, basically used this opportunity and this uproar around this column to create more pressure on the newspaper to censor itself on Israel, because pro-Palestine sentiment on campus was gaining a lot of traction. It certainly did when I assumed office. I became the first Palestinian opinions editor that the newspaper had in its history, and we're talking about the oldest collegiate paper since the United States became the United States. I was also the only Arab editor for my entire editorial staff, so I guess that was kind of, a sensitive thing in the office. And on top of that, I was told by people that had worked there before that I was the first hijab-wearing Muslim woman that they had as an editor in the newspaper as well. So when I assumed my position, what exactly was I coming into? When I was a freshman at Rutgers, the newspaper had a really awful reputation for being very pro-Israel, very slanted. The opinions page only showed these really strong columns, like the one you saw from Rabbi Weiss, that were very distorted and showed only one side, one point of view to things. And there was a lot of controversy on campus even then. So these are statistics that were put together by students and faculty alike. They went back through an entire year to 2 year span in the newspaper of the opinions page before I assumed office. This was 2 years before I received my desk as the opinions editor. And they put together how many opinions articles were exactly published that were pro-Palestine, how many were published that were pro-Israel, and how many were neutral. And as you can see, there are almost twice as many op-eds published that were pro-Israel than pro-Palestine. So this is what I was dealing with. And honestly, this was a huge motivation for me when I got invited to apply for the position, because I was like, wow, this is something that I've been wanting to change since I was a freshman. So now I'm a junior, why not, right? So I went for it, and I got elected for the position. And lo and behold, immediately, literally my first month in office, this was probably even the first week of me being the opinions editor, I was charged with bias, immediately. Literally one of the first op-eds that I published was submitted by a Hillel member on campus, and it was about Iran and Israel's interests in US policies in Iran, why the US should be against Iran, et cetera, et cetera. And the editorial process, like I mentioned earlier, goes through a series of editors. So this particular column received the exact same treatment any other column did. We put it through the editorial process, fact-checked it, we edited it for length so it can fit into the paper so that we can even publish it in the first place. But immediately that student and other really influential and vocal members of Hillel made a very public complaint against me that I was biased. And I'm not entirely sure that I would have been accused of that had I been any other identity than an Arab Muslim woman in that position. So things started really heating up when it came to Targum on campus. I was under a lot of scrutiny. The spotlight was literally on me for what was being published, how it was being published, and the treatment that the op-eds were receiving. One Hillel member who had the position of being the Israel chair, so I'm assuming his position has something to do with promoting pro-Israel relations on campus or something. He actually started an entire blog dedicated to me and started having Hillel members that submitted op-eds also submit those same op-eds to him. And then he made a blog where he would show what the original version was and what the edited version looks like. And then any edits that were made that weren't always mine, but they were pretty typical, very, very usual edits, He would politicize them and attribute some great underlying intention behind it, and really, trying to rev up the sentiment around me that I'm like this biased, unreliable editor and I shouldn't be in my position. And interestingly enough, no other editor in our staff received that same type of treatment, that same type of scrutiny. No one else was really considered for whether they're approaching a topic sensitively or not. Now, as a result, for a number of times throughout my term, was threatened for termination by the Board of Trustees. What wasn't disclosed is that one member of the Board of Trustees is actually the mother of one of the leading officials of Hillel entirely, and that was something that they kept secret from us. So obviously, things already behind the scenes are politicized. And the very close ties the Board of Trustees had with Hillel, they used that to try and increase pressure on me to decide what my editorial decisions were. Things really popped off when I published an op-ed that was pro-Palestine, because we had published one that was pro-Israel the day before. And when I published the pro-Palestine one, I got accused by, that was probably the popping off point, where everyone really attacked me for being biased. That particular official in Hillel, whose mother was on the board, she said that she had submitted a letter and I hadn't picked hers over the pro-Palestine one, and I should because she's an official Hillel official, even though a pro-Palestine letter was published before hers. And they wanted to create a rule where anytime a pro-Palestine letter was published, a pro-Israel letter had to be published alongside it. A major double standard, because countless pro-Israel letters were published without any kind of consideration towards the opposing side. So they were telling the Board of Trustees, we have to tell this editor, she has to publish Hillel letters on Monday because that's when the newspaper gets the most circulation. She has to publish pro-Israel letters alongside pro-Palestine letters. And multiple times they told me if I didn't do exactly what they said, they were going to fire me. So I had many opportunities to expose what was happening behind the scenes, but this is an issue that I think Dima is going to speak a lot for with students on college campuses, is that they're in a very vulnerable position. So for me, I had to risk losing my job, which was my paycheck. I had to risk a reputation in my school for being an editor if I got fired or if I got terminated. And I was really confused because also when I reached out to the Board of Trustees, before I realized this was all coming from them, I expressed my concerns that I was being discriminated against. And they responded to me by saying, basically that I'm the one that should be worried, that I'm the one that they're concerned with about bias, that I'm the one that is the problem. So I started also wondering, like, wait, am I doing something wrong? And then this was compiled. Same survey that was conducted years before I became the opinions editor. They conducted the same one for my term exactly. The op-eds that were published pro-Palestine and pro-Israel and neutrally on this topic during my term. And they found that, again, even with a Palestinian Muslim Arab woman as the opinions editor, there were still almost twice as many pro-Israel letters published during my term than pro-Palestine letters. But this is something that all the blogs and newspapers that were writing about this issue, it was something that they never considered or covered in any of their coverage, which I think speaks a lot to it. So for the end of my term, every editor gets the privilege of having a farewell column. That's their opportunity to, talk very emotionally about how much the Targum gave back to them, what they learned from their experience, etc. So I finally had made it. I was at the finish line. I was like, yes, I didn't get fired. I survived, So I was like, this is the perfect opportunity for me to tell other students what exactly is happening behind the scenes. This is what I experienced. So I wrote up an entire column, basically detailing exactly what happened from A to Z. And my own editorial staff censored me. I didn't even have to rely on the Board of Trustees anymore. My own co-editors who witnessed everything that was happening, they told me, no, we can't publish this because it's going to make our newspaper look bad. So I was like, all right, you're going to censor me. I'm going to go to the Huffington Post. And then the Huffington Post decided to publish it. Now, this was my first time writing for a major publication like this, and I was very relieved because I was almost in tears when they were censoring me. I was like, wow, this is literally happening again, even as I'm about to leave. But thankfully, it turned out for the better because this issue ended up receiving a national audience, and it getting published in the Huffington Post is even the reason why I'm here today. The ADC, the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, it's the largest civil rights organization in the country for Arab Americans. They saw this and they reached out to me because they felt like I was being discriminated against. And then only a couple of months later, when I was about to graduate from college, they reached out to me and recruited me to be their media relations specialist. And now I'm in DC where these decisions are happening. Now, my time is up, so I just want to wrap up with this HuffPo article came out with, it was followed up by the Foundation for Individual Rights of Education. They wrote a blog about it, and in the blog they said, Targum readers think that they are getting news on controversial topics from independent student editors, but instead they seem to be getting the perspective of unknown members of a board of trustees working behind the scenes. Now, if college campuses are a microcosm of society, I hope that everyone keeps this in mind when we think about what's really happening with our news today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amani. It really is wonderful for me to be here with three amazingly talented young Palestinian Americans. That's such, like, you know, when I came to this country 30 years ago, it was very different. And here we see leadership being formed amongst a new generation of Palestinian Americans. So our next speaker is an exemplar, Dima Khalidi. I said this the other day. I've known her since she was born, and it's my real pleasure and honor to introduce her. She's the founder of an organization now rebranded as Palestine Legal, formerly known as Palestinian Solidarity Legal Support, which Dima said is kind of a mouthful. So she will tell you what they do, and it's a small organization with currently three extremely active lawyers who provide legal support in circumstances exactly similar to what Amani said. One of the things that another of their staff attorneys said is that the First Amendment has no Palestine exception. Bear that in mind. I mean, I've worked in the media in this country for 35 years, and I was subject, even at the Christian Science Monitor over the years, to exactly the same kind of double standard that Amani talked about at the Daily Targum. You know, if I took a trip, then who is funding the trip? It would all be extensively interrogated, and I had to report it. People who were reporting stuff from Israel, nobody ever examined who was paying for their trips. That stuff goes on in the media, in the national mainstream media, all the time, and the Christian Science Monitor was among the best of them. So anyway, I'm glad that you guys are here to take up the struggle and take it to new levels. Dima Khalidi.
Hello, it's so nice to be here in such a full room. This is lovely. I think it's crucially important that you hear about this issue about the way that students on campuses are affected from students themselves or recent students themselves. You know, it's really, their experiences exemplify what Palestine Solidarity Legal Support, still PSLS, but Palestine Legal for short, is seeing again and again around the country. And we work nationally, so we are getting a very good sense of how widespread this problem is. There's really a concerted effort among Israel advocacy groups in the US to undermine and thwart campus activism for Palestinian rights. There are dozens of national and local organizations that are contributing to this effort, and I think you've heard about some of them throughout the morning. And they're spending millions of dollars to mount campaigns against groups, against individuals, all intended to stop the momentum of the movement for Palestinian rights. And this has been now focused on campuses because of the energy of the student movement, because boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaigns are gaining strength, and students are spearheading a lot of those efforts. And that is a big threat to the status quo in this country and in Israel. On the most basic level, we're dealing with efforts to curb dissent on one of the few issues that has long garnered unconditional, bipartisan support in this, the nation's capital especially, as you all know, which is support for Israel. But such dissent is exactly what the First Amendment of the US Constitution is designed to protect. When government officials, including public university officials, right, dictate the limits of acceptable public discourse, they're effectively censoring viewpoints that they disagree with. And universities in general have been exalted by the US Supreme Court as peculiarly the marketplace of ideas. And it has emphasized the dependence of a free society on free universities. It's also repeated that free speech cannot be limited based on how uncomfortable it may make some people, because, quote, a function of free speech under our system of government is to invite dispute. It may indeed best serve its high purpose when it induces a condition of unrest, creates dissatisfaction with conditions as they are, or even stirs people to anger. Yet Israel advocacy groups have played a central role in encouraging public and private institutions to silence and punish dissent on the Israel-Palestine issue through a number of tactics that often rely on complaints that students who support Israel are made uncomfortable by this discourse. The dissent in question is characterized by activities such as lectures, film screenings, creative actions like mock checkpoints on campuses, mock eviction flyers being posted in dorms to give a sense of what Palestinians go through every day, and boycott and divestment campaigns, of course. These are all forms of speech that are protected from government interference by the First Amendment of the Constitution. Palestine Legal has since 2012 been tracking these efforts and challenging them with legal advocacy on behalf of activists that are facing backlash, like Amani, I think, showed daily. We're getting an enormous amount of requests for help. I'd like to elucidate some of the trends that Palestine Legal has observed in tracking the repression of Palestine activism on campuses especially. Just to give you an idea of the volume of requests for legal advice and reports of repression that we've gotten, in 2014, we documented over 240 requests and reports of incidents, which was more than double what we documented in 2013. And about 75% of these originated on campuses and involved students or academics, professors, faculty, others who were under attack. And so far this year, just in the first 3 months of 2015, we've already documented over 115 requests for help and incidents of repression. Again, the majority on campuses. Some of the most prominent tactics that Palestine Legal has documented include smear campaigns, legal complaints, disparate treatment by universities, and interference in student democratic processes. I think we've heard a lot about smear campaigns. Richard Falk and Alice Rothschild spoke a lot to that, as has Amani, I think. But smear campaigns include false accusations of anti-Semitism, as we know, against individuals and groups that criticize Israeli policies. And they rely on this false conflation of criticism of those policies with a hatred of Jewish people as a whole. Israel advocacy groups have long been promoting and attempting to codify a redefinition of anti-Semitism. If we listen to Alice's definition of anti-Semitism before, this new definition is designed to encompass anything that delegitimizes, applies double standards to, or demonizes Israel. That can encompass anything and everything, as you can imagine. And this redefinition recently appeared in student government resolutions, which were passed at UC Berkeley, the University of California, Berkeley, and UCLA, as well as now in a California state resolution. While the definition has no legal basis, precisely because it would undermine basic First Amendment rights to engage in political speech, it nevertheless stigmatizes those who are openly critical of Israeli policies and increases pressure on universities to curb such criticism. So these kinds of accusations really underlie almost all of the incidents that we document at Palestine Legal. False accusations of connections with groups that are designated as terrorist organizations by the US government are also very pervasive, especially with students. And there's a particularly pernicious effort to associate Students for Justice in Palestine chapters, of which there are dozens in schools across the United States, with Hamas in particular, as with the Hamas on Campus website that I think was mentioned earlier. Another effort has been something that again, ironically named David Horowitz Freedom Center recently posted on campuses around the country. You can see here that they had Students for Justice in Palestine written on the top, and they depicted brutal Hamas activities against other Palestinians, and the hashtag Jew haters at the bottom. And we saw these on campuses around the country. So this same organization, the Horowitz Freedom Center, also encouraged students to do mock hangings on campus to allegedly expose the hypocrisy of SJPs, and mock stonings on campus, again, in reaction to SJP's mock checkpoints on campus, et cetera. The chilling effect on academics and students is undeniable. I mean, who wants to be branded as an anti-Semite or a terrorist just for speaking out for Palestinian rights? This has cost some, like Professor Steven Salaita, their professional careers. His tenured appointment at the University of Illinois was terminated after the Simon Wiesenthal Center and the Jewish Federation launched a campaign in reaction to what? His tweets over the summer about the Gaza war. And some of them were impassioned, some of them were, might have been offensive to some people. But the campaign claimed he was a baseless anti-Semite, and that hiring him presented a, quote, real danger to the entire campus community, especially to its Jewish students. The university responded to these complaints, including threats from major donors to pull their funding, and they refused to formalize his appointment because of his, quote, uncivil tweets that they said made him unfit to teach. So this man's professional career has effectively been ruined. Another common tactic that Israel advocacy groups employ at the university level is to file complaints under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. These allege that Palestine activism on campus creates a hostile environment for Jewish students, specifically those who support Israel. Complaints against universities and even the mere threat of such complaints put universities on the defensive. No such complaints have succeeded thus far legally. The Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, which investigates these complaints, has in fact dismissed roundly 4 such complaints. And they've stated very clearly that the activities complained of were protected political speech, not harassment based on national origin or race, and that exposure to such robust and discordant expressions, I'm quoting, even when personally offensive, is a circumstance that a reasonable student in higher education may experience. In other words, what is college for, if not to challenge students' preconceived notions of the world before they come into college? Despite these strong decisions from the Department of Education, the chilling effect is deeply felt. And in order to avoid such complaints and accusations, or to show that they're effectively responding to them, universities are erecting obstacles to pro-Palestinian student activism, investigating student activities, and disproportionately punishing students and student groups because of their viewpoint that they are expressing. To give you a taste of typical bureaucratic obstacles that we're seeing, students have reported to Palestine Legal the following. Administrators repeatedly calling in students to explain their events to administrators. Provide scripts of their street theater performances, or give names of individuals participating in their activities. Schools requiring student groups to pay for their own security at their events because of complaints or expected protests from pro-Israel groups. Administrators telling students that they can't use the word apartheid, literally, or that they can't use the name Students for Justice in Palestine for their student group because it's too controversial. Excessive delays in approving events, which obviously impedes their ability to hold events, and changes in school policies in direct response to their activities so that they can't repeat them again. So this kind of bureaucratic harassment has a real cumulative effect on students, draining their time and resources, and hindering their ability to put on events, and generally acting to dissuade and distract them from their organizing work. Now, investigations and disciplinary actions also commonly result from Israel advocacy groups' pressure on universities. Groups like the Zionist Organization of America and the, again, ironically named Americans for Peace and Tolerance, pressured Northeastern University for years to shut down Palestine activism on that campus. And Northeastern has obliged. First, by putting the group Students for Justice in Palestine on probation for a brief walkout they did of an event featuring an Israeli soldier talking about the ethics of the IDF. And then by suspending the SJP chapter after they distributed mock eviction flyers in the dorms. To understand the university's reaction, we have to understand the nature of the pressure that Northeastern has been under. Americans for Peace and Tolerance first started a campaign called Shame on NEU, claiming that SJP was, quote, calling for the murder of Jews and cheerleading Hamas, among other baseless accusations. The ZOA compounded this with a threat to file a legal complaint, a Title VI complaint, as I discussed before. And they claimed that the university tolerated a hostile environment for Jewish students by employing professors that were critical of Israel and by allowing SJP to organize on campus. The ZOA made sure to copy one of its own major supporters, Robert Shillman, who also happened to donate $3 million to the university to build Shillman Hall, and whose statue also happens to adorn the campus. One incident at Loyola University in Chicago led to blatantly disparate disciplinary action against the SJP group there last fall. Students learned of a tabling event publicizing Birthright Israel trips, which was sponsored by the school's Hillel chapter. And they decided they learned about this the night before. Several students, mainly Palestinians, spontaneously decided to line up at the table and try to register in an attempt to highlight the program's discriminatory policies. Only Jewish students are presumed, of course, to have a birthright to the land that constitutes Israel and the Palestinian territory, and they're offered free trips there. When students lined up and calmly asked to register for a free trip, since after all, their own grandparents hailed from now destroyed villages in present-day Israel, students manning the table immediately complained to administrators. The university undertook a month-long investigation, and they eventually charged SJP as a group with 6 conduct violations, including bias-motivated misconduct, harassment and bullying, and a violation of school demonstration policies. SJP was ultimately found responsible for only one of the 6 charges, which was violating demonstration policies, not registering their demonstration 7 days in advance like the school requires. But for this infraction, the group was placed on probation for the remainder of the year, and they couldn't access any more school funds. Meanwhile, Hillel was also found responsible for not registering their tabling event. Their sanction, however, was vastly different. They were merely required to go and talk to administrators about what the registration policies were so that it would be clear to them in the future. So this kind of disparate treatment and disproportionate punishment has come to characterize university reactions to Palestine activism on campus. And this spring especially, we've seen a huge number of attempts to interfere in student democratic processes, especially around divestment resolutions. The spring happens to be a very big time for those on campuses. Just to give one quick example, at the University of Toledo, the Jewish Federation pressured the student government to close a hearing on a divestment resolution to all but Hillel and the SJP chapter, even though there were others, of course, supporting the initiative. And the 2 groups were barred from the hearing room while the other one presented, so they couldn't hear the other's arguments. The Federation also held a closed-door session with the student government before on anti-Semitism, to make that clear. And before the resolution even came to a vote, the Judicial Council declared that it was unconstitutional and discriminatory, and it stopped the vote from taking place. Well, there was an uproar from students and supporters, including Palestine Legal and other attorneys who wrote to the student government. And the student government ended up allowing an open hearing. The resolution passed, ultimately. So what does this all mean? This doesn't even begin to explain the depth of the problem, because we're seeing such a huge number of cases like these that affect dozens and dozens and hundreds of individuals, faculty, et cetera. We really are witnessing a situation in which it's become impossible for students and faculty on US campuses to speak out for Palestinian rights without being personally attacked and condemned as hateful and anti-Semitic and punished for their by their universities in response to pressure from these Israel advocacy groups. The incidents that we are documenting do point to an apparent Palestine exception to the First Amendment, a situation in which public officials find it acceptable to muzzle a certain viewpoint in order to appease a strong political constituency, and often big donors, of course. In addition to the palpable effects on their direct targets, which I think Amani and Ahmed point to very well, and I think Alice showed that also very well, the emotional burden on people who are attacked in this way is something that is not really understood or talked about very much. But these repression tactics work to restrict public debate on a critical issue and thereby help preserve the status quo on Israel-Palestine in this country. Universities, think tanks, policymakers, media outlets, if any of you are here, forsake their responsibility to address one of the most prolonged human rights issues of our time when they accede to these pressure campaigns and inhibit people from speaking and protesting and taking collective, nonviolent action to effect some kind of change. Without an honest and critical public conversation about this. U.S. policy in the region will continue to enable this state of occupation and subjugation. And really, it is precisely because students and others on university campuses are reaching their peers. They're making connections, oh, it's a sound, between social justice movements and proposing a rights-based approach to the conflict that Israel advocacy groups are putting their thumbs on the scale now. They know it's on university campuses that the civil rights and anti-apartheid movements gain strength, and that youth are the drivers of change. It's upon us to ensure, ultimately, that these voices are heard, that efforts to suppress this movement are exposed and challenged, and that we allow discourse in this country to move beyond blind support for a repressive regime that we ourselves are enabling, in fact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dima. So next up, we're going to have Ahmed Saadeddine, who's a filmmaker, producer, creative writer, actor, and grassroots organizer dedicated to sharing untold stories to raise awareness and create positive change. As a public relations major at the University of South Florida, Ahmed organized the largest grassroots campaign in the university's history, collecting more than 10,000 signatures calling on the school to divest endowment funds from corporations complicit in human rights violations. So, Ahmed, really looking forward to hearing your tales from college and maybe from since college.
Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here. My name is Ahmed Saadeddine, and I'm a graduate from the University of South Florida. While I was there, I served as the president of Students for Justice in Palestine for 2 years, and I was one of the main organizers of the divestment campaign that took place there. My presentation today is going to be about campus activism, overcoming obstacles and suppression, and achieving success. So I'm going to start with the obstacles that I think are very difficult for SJPs to overcome. Number one is active suppression of student organizations by student government and universities. And number two, the demonization of Muslim, Arab, and SJP students and activists by pro-Israel organizations. So I'm going to try and help you understand some of the obstacles that we face by sharing with you my experience at USF and what we went through over there, and then trying to tie it in with what's going on around the nation. So in January 2013, we started our divestment campaign. I went to student government and I met with the Senate president, who was in charge of creating the agenda for the meetings. And I shared with him a copy of our divestment resolution. It was just a draft at the time. And I asked for advice. I was trying to learn more about the process. How does it work? And he told me, you should attend the student government meeting later that evening. And he asked to keep a copy of our divestment resolution. So I couldn't make it that evening, but a couple of our members could. So they went to the meeting, and they stayed, and they learned, and they took notes. And at the end of the meeting, a complete stranger came up to them, got in their face, put his finger in their chest, and said, "Dead on arrival." They're shocked. Who is this guy? What is he talking about? He goes on to say, "If your resolution touches the floor, I'll veto it." It turned out he was a student body president. So obviously we were very disturbed by that, so I went back. I'll explain it. I'll show you his picture in a moment. His name is Brian Goff. Anyway, I returned to the Senate president, and I told him what happened, and he said, "Don't worry about that. He won't veto it, because I won't even let it touch the floor. I'll never put it on the agenda. I sent your resolution to the University Legal Counsel, and they told me that divestment is illegal." So before we even started our campaign, we were told, no political stances, dead on arrival, no international politics, and it won't even touch my floor. So this was very concerning for us, especially since 2 months before we started our campaign, the student body president sent a letter to Hillel during Operation Pillar of Cloud when Israel slaughtered hundreds of civilians in Gaza, and he told them, as student body president, I support Israel's right to self-defense on behalf of the student body. So clearly there's a double standard about who and when we can take political stances. So after the backlash and suppression that we faced already, we gave up, right? Wrong. We did not give up. we learned that we could get our resolution in the form of a referendum. All we had to do was collect 1,500 signatures, and we could get it on the ballot for student body elections. But there was one problem. We learned on Tuesday night that we had to collect the signatures by Friday, so we only had 3 days to do it. So we gave up, right? No. Wrong. We collected 2,500 signatures. It was the largest petition in University of South Florida history at the time. So we collected the signatures, we followed the rules, we got it in on time, so it got on the ballot, right? Wrong. The night before student government elections were to begin, we received an email from the student body president, the Senate president, the university lawyer, the assistant dean of students, and the election rules commissioner, and they told us your referendum will not be on the ballot because it's illegal and it violates university policy. Which policy? They did not tell us. In an email from the assistant dean to the student body president, she asked, what's going to happen with the referendum? He responds, we will not put it on the ballot. As if it's up to him, as if he's the king, he can decide, there's no rules, as if we violated some rule, we're doing something illegal. Clearly, that wasn't the case. Now, the Senate president, who was very aggressive with us in the beginning, told us it won't touch my floor. Turns out he had a little bit of a conscience, and he replied by saying, it is neither up to me or the student body president. We don't have the authority to stop this referendum. We are violating their right to the referendum process. As soon as he said that, the University Legal Counsel told him, if you put this on the ballot, you could be charged with a misdemeanor. And I am the lawyer, and I'm advising you, and I have to defend you, so I'm just letting you know. So he calls me Sunday night from his cell phone, and he tells me, I want to put this on the ballot, but they're charging me with a misdemeanor. Can you help me? So I got a lawyer, and that lawyer immediately told him, if you do not put this referendum on the ballot, we will file a lawsuit. So that's exactly what happened. Now, the election results were bittersweet. We needed 50% plus 1 to pass. We got 49.55%. So we failed by 19 votes. But the overwhelming majority of students, over 2,000 people, voted yes in favor of divestment, compared to only 600 saying no. So this was very exciting, right? Wrong, because right after the results, the student body president ordered an executive memorandum ordering the election rules commissioner to invalidate the results because it was illegal and supposedly confusing. And not only that, but he started a bill which eventually passed in student government, giving the Supreme Court the authority to censor any referendum. And can you guess what students are on the Supreme Court? All Hillel students. Not only did he do that, but he sent an email to the entire USF community, 46,000 people, students, faculty, and staff, telling them, I apologize for putting the referendum on the ballot. It was illegal. We shouldn't have done that. It was confusing. It'll never happen again. To get approval to send such an email, he had to get permission from who? The office of the university president. So this was much bigger than just some student body president. The administration, the lawyers, the assistant dean of students were getting involved and applying pressure. Now, you might be wondering, why is the student body president such a jerk? Why does he say dead on arrival, it won't be on the ballot, sends an email to everyone telling them that we were confusing and we were violating the law? Turns out, not only does he attend AIPAC conferences, he leads seminars committing himself to supporting U.S.-Israeli relations. This is a tweet from Brian Goff at AIPAC. You had me at Shalom, hashtag pickup line. This AIPAC puppet undermined the voices of thousands of students. So after all that, we gave up, right? Wrong. We did not give up. We decided that we were going to create a petition outside of student government so that they couldn't just invalidate us, and we were going to make it the largest petition in the history of any Florida university. We collected 10,000 signatures, and we went straight to the USF Foundation, the group that manages the endowment, and we told them, here are the signatures. You ignored us last year. We want divestment, and we want it now. So that's exactly what happened, right? Wrong. The USF Foundation, in 19 minutes, they only discussed our petition for 19 minutes. I swear to God, I have it on camera. And they rejected our petition. Why? It turns out the executive director of the Hillel on our campus posted a blog where he brags about having one-on-one meetings with Jewish trustees in order to thwart the efforts of SJP. He also told them that they lied about how many signatures they collected. They're anti-Semitic, and they were bribing students with pizza. 10,000 slices of pizza. That's got to be like $50,000. Way over our budget. Not only does he say that, but he says that his students have been working behind the scenes to undermine SJP and student government. This is a statement from the USF Foundation where they say, we will not politicize our investments. We rejected the petition. So what message does a university send to its students when they reject a petition from 10,000 of them calling for something? What message does a university send to its students when the student body president sends an email to 46,000 people saying, the referendum you petitioned for, the referendum you voted for is invalidated, but please don't forget to vote for your school t-shirt, have your voices heard? What message does a university send to its students when the student newspaper will not cover the largest petition in support of human rights, but will instead cover a petition to bring Chick-fil-A sauce to our student cafeteria? I'll tell you what message they're sending. They want us to shut up, go to class, pay a lot of money for tuition and for textbooks, don't talk about human rights, don't talk about anything else. The only thing you can talk about is t-shirts and Chick-fil-A sauce. Now, I felt special at the time. I thought, oh my God, they're doing all these terrible things to us. But it turns out it was happening all around the nation. It happened at Loyola when they passed divestment last year and the student body president was pressured into vetoing their resolution. It happens every year in DC when AIPAC recruits students and indoctrinates them with pro-Israeli propaganda by giving them free trips and free boat rides as seen here in this picture obtained from their website. It happened at Northwestern when the Israeli consulate and Stand With Us tried their hardest to thwart their divestment resolution. It happened at Northeastern when they suspended them. It happened at Loyola when they gave them sensitivity training. It happened at FAU when they gave them sensitivity training. And that is all just suppression by the student government and the university. What about the demonization of student activists and minorities? This is a quote from an interview that the UCLA director of Hillel gave to a reporter. He said, "Campus politics have been hijacked by a group of students who are intent to conquer the coalition of Arab, Muslim, Latino, Asian, and gay students. They're all oppressed minorities." So when AIPAC buys students, when they have one-on-one meetings to undermine the voices of thousands of students, that's not hijacking. But when minorities get involved, not only are we hijacking, we're trying to conquer. This is a screenshot from an event that took place at my university. This woman, Dr. Anat Berko, a so-called terrorism expert, came and told students that jihad is a holy war against the infidel. It's the personal duty of every Muslim to kill a non-Muslim, and if they don't, they're a religious hypocrite. And if they want paradise, they need to kill a non-believer. She's talking about me. She's telling my fellow classmates and students that this is what I believe. A week later, instead of passing out hummus and falafel, on Culture Day, Hillel decided to pass out flyers saying, Islam will obliterate Israel, Islam must dominate, Islam will kill Jews. Now, after all this demonization of suppression and rejecting our petition and referendum, we gave up, right? Wrong. We came together and we raised some money, paid out of our own pockets, and we paid for a billboard right outside our university. So every student who goes to school has to see it. Saying 10,000 students silenced, and USF investments in Israeli apartheid, USF for human rights. Now, what was the reaction? What were Hillel students telling us on Facebook? They accused us of terrorism. Now, we posted that billboard 2 weeks after the attacks in Paris, when freedom of speech was a huge topic, huge discussion, right? Our freedom of speech somehow was terrorizing them. This is another picture that they posted after SJP and MSA had a vigil for the 3 Muslim students that were killed in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Some of you might have heard about it in the news. Posting a picture of a crusader, obviously referring to the Crusades that slaughtered hundreds of thousands of Muslims. Another person says, all Muslims don't belong in America. That's too bad. I'm glad 3 are dead because all are terrorists. This is an organization called Hamas on Campus. Dima Khalid referred to them. Their mission is to expose SJP. In one of their videos, you can see they have this crazy web where they connect SJP to the Brotherhood, to Hamas, to all these different organizations claiming that our mission is to wipe Israel off the map and that we're anti-Semitic and that we're violent. They include a picture of 9/11 as if somehow SJP is affiliated to that. You might have seen these. This is from UCLA. They were passing out flyers affiliating SJP with violence, hashtag Jew haters. They passed it out all around campus, including on the mascot. SJP, hashtag Jew haters. So these are all the obstacles that we have to deal with in form of suppression and demonization. What about the success? Well, I like to think that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And every time they push, we push back harder. So when they suppress us, when they demonize us, we get better at organizing, we become stronger, we become much more active. We expose them and document their corruption. We increase our pressure on student governments to be more fair and transparent. And students are realizing that if our student government isn't going to be fair and transparent, then I need to take matters into my own hands. I'm going to run for student body elections. I'm going to get involved, and I'm going to hold them to a higher standard. And at the end of the day, awareness is key. So when they demonize us, right, any publicity is good publicity. And I say that because that university student body president who sent an email to 46,000 people about our referendum didn't realize that while he was trying to demonize us and smear us, only 4,000 people voted on the referendum. He just told 46,000 people about our referendum. And we were getting flooded with emails asking, what is this referendum about? What are they talking about? Why are they silencing students? And I'll give you some examples of success. They ended up passing divestment at Loyola again. This time the student body president did not veto it. At ASUC, they passed divestment again. The student body president did not veto it. And at DePaul last year, in one of the biggest victories for divestment, they passed a referendum despite the interference of pro-Israeli organizations pumping money and resources, trying to smear them and lie about them, and they still passed it. And you remember our good friends on Facebook that were calling us terrorists for posting billboards? Well, complete strangers rushed to our defense, accusing them of ignorance and hatred, and one woman told him, I'm just still confused as to why you chose the word terrorist. Well, I'm not confused. I know why, because they're a Palestinian Muslim organization, and in your head, that equals terrorist. Please take your Wonder Bread elsewhere with your ignorant comments. Lastly, I'd like to make the point that one of the biggest successes we have is obviously the growth of divestment, the growth of this conversation, despite the fact that they're trying so hard to silence us. So this is a map obtained from a pro-Israel organization. This is their website where they document SJPs and divestment. So these red dots are places where divestment has successfully passed in the form of a resolution or a referendum. So every time they try and silence us, every time they demonize us, lie about us, every time Israel attacks Gaza, SJP spreads, and so does divestment. Every blue dot is a point where an SJP chapter has been formed and where a divestment campaign is taking place. So our message to them is no matter what you do to silence us, we will never be silent. So obviously this entire thing was very emotional for me. I was invested in it. But since then, my friend and I have been producing a documentary titled Suppression, in which we're trying to document all this and tell our story. So if you don't mind now, I'd like to share with you the trailer for that documentary. Is that something you all would like? All right. Thank you for your time.
The Israelis and the Palestinians have been fighting for thousands of years over some little rock, and it's like, no, that's not it.
People are starting to say, well, we support Israel, but you seem to be killing a lot of civilians. And so the response from the Israeli government is to say, you have to understand that we're fighting terrorism.
But we shall have the upper hand in fighting the terror as well. We shall not give up.
It has to be stopped now. Support Israel.
It ignores the fact that you have a military occupation of Palestine.
There's nothing more that people in the Israeli establishment want than the continuation of the peace process, and it's because it's been all process and no peace. And it's bought them lots of time to build walls, settlements, lay siege to Gaza, and it's bought them time diplomatically to avoid the consequences of maintaining an apartheid state.
If a state is a Jewish state, people who are of the Jewish religion have preferred status, have extra rights and privileges. So that would make it an ethnocracy, not a democracy.
If you're not Jewish, you're going to be excluded, ghettoized, or in the case of these Africans, put in camps, which even the president of Israel, Reuven Rivlin, has called concentration camps.
Israel, small as it is one of the largest arms producers, arms exporters in the world.
When they market these guns and these missiles and these drones, they say they're field tested.
Now, combat proven.
And And not every military and not every arms company can do that because they don't have 70 years of dominating, controlling, and attacking the rest of indigenous populations.
Tariq's story and Mohammed Abu Qadir's death has made a difference. You know, people are curious to know what's really going on, and they are finding out what's going on.
And you have the rising leaders of Israel using genocidal rhetoric. Moshe Feiglin has called for Palestinians in Gaza to be exterminated and put in concentration camps in the Sinai desert. And so when I report this, which is all factual, and when David Sheen reports it, we get called anti-Semitic. But these are the facts.
When I hear what people say about us, just because me and my friends, what we do, raise awareness and have these events, and people label us as extreme, radical extensions of Hamas, all these crazy things. And I'm just passionate about this conflict because I see oppression and I just want to speak out about it.
We collected 10,000 signatures. This is the largest student petition in the history of any Florida university.
This is like as big as it's going to get. So if you're going to ignore 10,000 students, I don't know what comes after that. It's so important that we speak out here in America because we are responsible for the occupation. We are funding it. We give Israel billions of dollars a year. It's our duty to speak out and say, listen, we're paying taxes. We don't accept this anymore. People are losing their jobs over this. Their lives are being absolutely destroyed.
One day, you will be walking in the streets as a respected professor, and the second day, you're in solitary confinement. When you are brought to the courthouse, they have snipers over rooftops. They take you in a helicopter, like Tampa is under attack somehow. It was unbelievable. It was all the creation of the government in order to bring this to the jury that somehow we were so dangerous that they needed all this protection.
And in the end, the government drops the charges. Oh, okay, after 11 years. So you can't help but feel like, what if this happens to me?
So thank you so much, Ahmed, Amani, and Dima. What did I say about the new generation of leaders coming up? We have time for maybe one question given to each of the panelists. So, Dima, if you could choose your question first and answer succinctly and strongly, but mainly shortly. Yes. Because the next thing is lunch.
The question, can you hear me? Okay. The question is, the only way to win the battle for control over Palestinian-Israeli narrative on campus is to win over the moderates who are on the fence. How can SJP groups operate effectively and present their message without being labeled as extremists? I don't think I need to speak for the students. Our role at Palestine Legal is not to tell them what to say. And do they seem extremist to you? I don't think so. And I think this is part of the problem, that students should be able to get their message across, and they're doing it effectively. And that's the problem, that Israel advocacy groups are seeing that they're doing it effectively, and that's where the repression comes in. So, I think they are getting moderates, so to speak, off the fence, and and that's why we're seeing all of this suppression. So, that would be my answer to that question, and I think they speak very well for themselves. So.
Thanks. Amani, which question are you choosing? Sure.
This question comes from a student leader in an SJP in New York City. It says, what's your advice for those of us who are constantly getting ostracized and repressed for being active in the Palestinian liberation movement, especially being in a city like New York that has a large demographic of pro-Israelis and Zionists? From experience, my biggest piece of advice is to remain consistent and never get disheartened, because there's a reason why it is so stressful being in our position and why we're facing such strong adversaries. It's because what we're saying is threatening. That's literally all we have. All we have on our side are the facts and the truth. And we can go up against rhetoric and talking points all day, every day, but the truth is always going to prevail, and that is terrifying for the status quo. So just remain consistent and never lose hope in that.
This question says, why doesn't SJP work on all campuses to educate student leaders so they don't have to attend all expense-paid trips to Washington, D.C. and attend the APAC conference? I think that's something that, as people are trying to do. To have an SJP at a university, you need people that want to start an SJP, and it's growing. Eventually, I think it'll get there, but we're, I think, well behind APAC and these other organizations. They have a lot of money, and they've been doing this for years, so I think we're making a lot of progress, but we need support from people like you. So thank you very much.
So I know that Dima, Amani, and Ahmed will be around for you to ask questions, talk with them some more. Again, just one quick plug for Nora Barrows-Friedman book about the SJP movement. Are you in it, Ahmed? Oh, yeah. So you can learn a lot more about the SJP movement from these wonderful people and more about Palestine Legal. If you just think how much money goes into the discourse suppression organizations that Dima mentioned a little bit, all the panelists mentioned a little bit, Palestine Legal has 3 attorneys and 1 administrative person. It's amazing what the needs are. You can get more information about Palestine Legal outside. You can talk to Dima, obviously. There's lunch. I think there's a box lunch awaiting everybody over here. And then the next session is supposed to start at 1:15. So probably bring your box lunch back. And see you then.